Chapter 13. A Strange Meow. "The man with the funny hat," Pete exclaimed. "He's the one who stole our toys." "Then this is more serious than I thought," Mr. Hollister said. He confessed that up to now, he'd thought the intruder was only a harmless prankster. But he's up to something, and he must have the missing suitcase. I didn't tell you children before, but it contains some important papers that I must get back. "Maybe he's trying to find the treasure that's hidden in this house," Pete declared. "No doubt," his father agreed, "and I believe I had better tell the police about this." He telephoned, and while they were eating breakfast, Officer Cal came. He thought that the clue of the picture was so good that the police should be able to solve the mystery easily. He suggested that this information be kept secret, so the Hollisters agreed to say nothing about their latest clue to anybody. Even little Sue promised not to tell her friends. "But is it all right to tell Annie?" she asked. "Annie?" Officer Cal asked. "That's my dolly. She won't tell anybody." The policeman laughed. Then Pam told him the happy Hollisters thought the intruder was after a treasure that might be hidden in the house. "In that case," he said, "you'd better find it first." "We've already looked," said Holly. "A good detective never gives up," he smiled as he went off. "Let's play detective," Ricky suggested. "We'll find the treasure and the man with the funny hat and our toys in your suitcase, Dad." He laughed. "A big order, but good luck to you. I'll expect a report tonight." During the day, the children played detective seriously. When a peddler came to the door, Holly looked up at him and asked, "Do you have a funny little red hat?" The peddler looked very much surprised. He said yes, he had a little red hat which he wore years ago to a costume party, but he'd not seen it in years. He supposed it was in his attic. "Would you like to have it to play with?" the man asked. Holly said no, that was not the hat she meant. Then the man sold Mrs. Hollister 2 quarts of strawberries and went away. That night at the supper table, as Mr. Hollister was pouring cream on his dish of berries, he said, "Well, what did you young police assistants do today?" "I looked under every bush in our yard," Ricky said. "I thought maybe the treasure was buried somewhere outside. But I did find an Indian arrowhead." He held up the prize in his hand. Holly reported that she had searched in the garage. She really had found a treasure. "It was stuck behind one of the beams," she said, as the others listened intently. From her pocket, she brought out an old-fashioned coin purse. "There's a real silver dollar in it," she said proudly. "That's too heavy to carry around," Ricky spoke up, grinning. "How about using it to buy us ice cream?" The others laughed, and Holly said she was not going to spend it. She would save it to buy a Christmas present. Pete told the family he had continued his search in the attic and found an old storybook. "But it's for girls," he said in disappointment. Pam chuckled. "I'll trade it for what I found in the cellar," she said, holding one hand behind her back. "What is it?" "Sight unseen," Pam replied, teasing her brother. "Okay, I'll swap." Pam held out her hand. It was a tiny harmonica. "I washed it," she said, handing it to her brother, "and it still plays." Pete blew a few notes. "This is keen," he said, grinning. "I'll use it to get everybody up in the morning." "But not too early," his father begged. "I'll be getting to sleep late as I have some reading to do." He went to bed when the children did, but got a book and read for a couple of hours. Finally, he put down the book and raised up to switch off the light. As he did, he glanced out the window. Mr. Hollister was startled to see a dark, shadowy figure cross the lawn and disappear in the direction of the lakefront. "If that's the prowler, I'll get him this time," he told himself. Slipping into his robe, he tiptoed downstairs and out of the house. Someone was making a rustling noise on the dock. As he noticed the person bending over, Mr. Hollister said to himself, "I wonder what he's up to. Maybe he's going to steal our boat." He took a few steps forward, noiselessly. Finally, he was about 10 feet from the dock. In the darkness, he could make out that it was a small fellow, just the right size to slip through cellar windows. "Halt, whoever you are," Mr. Hollister shouted, at the same time leaping toward the prowler. As his hands gripped a pair of legs, there was a muffled shout, and the person crumpled on the dock. "Don't move, I have you," Mr. Hollister said. But Dad, it's Pete! Let me up!" Mr. Hollister released his grip. He stared unbelievingly, then laughed heartily as he helped Pete up. "I'm sorry, son. I thought you were our intruder. What on earth are you doing here?" "You sure are a good football tackle," Pete said. "I was just setting out some catfish lines." He said they had already been set and that he was picking up his can of worms when his father jumped him. "I didn't understand why Zip didn't bark when he heard you leave the house," Mr. Hollister said as they went back together. Pete chuckled. "I took care of that," he announced. "I put Zip in Pam's room." Next morning, Pete was the first one out of bed. He jumped into his clothes and ran from the house to the lakefront. One of his lines was stretched tightly. Pete pulled it in. On the hook was a catfish, 2 feet long. It thrashed about in the water as Pete lifted it up. "Hey, look at this! Look what I've caught!" he shouted. The other children came running from the house, followed by their parents. When little Sue saw the catfish, she jumped back in alarm. "What funny whiskers," she said. "Will it bite, Daddy?" When Mr. Hollister said it might, Sue skipped a respectable distance away, but she was still full of questions about the fish. Mr. and Mrs. Hollister walked toward the house, but the children remained behind. Sue asked Pete, "Why do they call it a catfish, Pete?" "I guess because it can meow," her brother replied, teasing her. "You're awful," Pam said. "Sue, it's because it has whiskers like a cat." "And I think they live among the cattails, too," Ricky put in. Sue was confused. "Can a catfish really meow like a cat?" she asked. Her big brother did not know whether to tease the little girl any more or not. He took the hook from the fish's mouth and held the big prize up. Then suddenly a funny look came over his face. The fish seemed to be talking. "Meow, meow," it said. This was followed by a purring sound. Pete's jaw dropped. He looked at Pam in amazement. The fish is meowing," he said meekly. "Sure, that's what you told me," Sue said. Pam's eyes grew as big as lollipops. Again came the soft meow, meow, meow. Pete dropped the catfish. This was more than he could stand. A catfish that meowed like a kitten. Even Ricky was a little frightened by the whole thing. Just then the children heard somebody laugh. They turned to look. Mr. Hollister stepped from behind a tree near where they were standing. "Do I make a good catfish?" he asked. "You really thought the fish was meowing?" "Oh, Dad," Pam exclaimed. "You're always playing jokes on us." "When you're not playing them on me," Mr. Hollister replied. Pete merely grinned. He ran into the house for a knife with which to skin the catfish. Then he asked permission to build a fire near the dock so he could broil it. Mr. Hollister said this would be all right if the children were careful. He left for the trading post. After the fire had been started, Pam brought a skillet from the kitchen with some butter in it. The big fish was cut in pieces and put into the pan. This was the first time Sue had seen such a thing. She became so excited that she skipped and pranced around the fire. "Don't get too close, Sue," Pam warned her. The little girl moved away, but a few moments later she was back again. Pete and Holly had gone for more wood. Pam went to get more butter. Suddenly Ricky, who was nearby, gasped. As Sue whirled about, her dress touched a sudden flame which shot upward. In a moment it was on fire. Ricky rushed over to his sister. He pushed her to the ground and began beating out the flames with his hands.